Madam Speaker. I want to pick up on, some of the things that I was hearing from my colleague and my colleague speaking earlier about the Red Tape Reduction Statutes Amendment Act, Bill 38, and say, yes, shouldn't we be living in a place where we value the lives of all Albertans? And it is shocking to me that we in fact live in a place where we're discussing changes to the Office and Child Youth Advocate, investigating the deaths of youth that had been in our care as part of a Red Tape Reduction Amendment Act. That alone, full stop, should give everybody pause to think about what we are doing in this chamber, the decisions that we are making, and how we value or don't value the lives of Albertans. This is incredible. And I'm also, in talking about the changes to the work of the Office of Child and Youth Advocate suggested in this bill, with a little bit of liberty, Madam Speaker, I'm going to step back in time a year in my still limited experience in this role. That for me, this is the second time that I have seen this government try to take away from the work of the Office and Child and Youth Advocate. Yeah. Last year, I had the opportunity, a little bit earlier than this time of year, to sub into the offices of the Legislative Offices Committee, where we were hearing about the budgets proposed from those legislative offices. One of those, of course, was the Office of Child and Youth Advocate. And that in that meeting, in a report that I saw clearly laid out from the office, their responsibilities, their expenses, their needs, in a report from the legislative assembly staff that clearly showed examples of comparisons, cost comparisons and work comparisons across this country. I sat and listened to the members opposite talk about how we shouldn't be funding the OCYA to the level that we are because Alberta's population is lower than British Columbia's population and they get less money than they do in Alberta. Meanwhile, the report that we were looking at clearly showed that in Alberta, the population of youth is higher than it is in British Columbia. So there's justification for the expenses of the OCYA. The OCYA, I also learned in that committee meeting, has additional responsibilities that also seem to be ignored by the members opposite when we were discussing the funding for the office of the OCYA. And now here I am, 1 year later, looking at a bill that is again undermining the work of the OCYA and stripping away this incredibly valuable work so that we can understand the impact of the work that we do in supporting children that are in our care. That we're talking about children and youth who are, again, the most vulnerable in this province. They have been through the course of their life until now under our care, the government's care. And now seemingly with the changes in Bill 38, we're no longer concerned with what happens to these children. That somehow miraculously we're absolved of any responsibility for having raised these children to where they are so far. That if we were asking parents if somehow at the age of 20, they no longer cared about the future of their children. That if after the age of 20, something happened to their children and they said, that's okay. They're over 20 now. They're no longer our legal responsibility. That, we talk a lot in this House. We've certainly heard from the members opposite so frequently in this House about the role of parents and parenting. And for these children, as we heard from my colleague from Whitemud earlier, for these children, their parents have been the government of Alberta. And now the government of Alberta is saying that we don't care about you anymore. You've reached the age of 20. We don't care about you anymore. We don't care about what happens to you. We don't care about whether or not we've given the children the opportunity to live a fulfilling life that all the rest of us have been given the opportunity to live. So this bill is now going to take away the work that the CYA does to investigate the deaths of youths that are aged 20 and older, when previously that went to the age of 24. I think we need to ask, what were we learning from these investigations that somehow we no longer feel is important for us to know? What are we learning from these investigations that would guide how we support these children when they are under our care, before they have aged out? Is there something about, and this is not a small number of children that are dying, of youth that are dying, that why do we no longer want to pay attention to our lessons learned so that we can do better, so that fewer of those youth die? Shouldn't our goal be to instead, rather than what we hear in this bill, is that maybe we want to save a couple of $1,000s? Shouldn't we be striving towards an outcome where all children who are in the care of the government of Alberta have the opportunity to live fulfilling and successful lives? And isn't that understanding and that work worth the couple of $1,000s that we're going to save when we enact this bill? I think that we should be ashamed at what we are proposing here, at what our values are, and question what really are our values. So while we have the opportunity, while we still have reports available to us about some of these youth, maybe we should take a moment to hear about some of their stories. So one of the investigations conducted by OCYA of Madison, who passed at the age of 21. She was 21 when she was hospitalized for significant burns to her body. She was receiving child intervention through the Transition to Adulthood program at the time of her serious injury. Madison was a kind, soft-spoken young woman who enjoyed music, cosmetology, spending time with friends. When she was a young teenager, Madison began to use substances when she was under the care of the government of Alberta. She was exploited and found it difficult to manage her mental health. Madison was from a blended family. As Shauna and Jason's only child, her parents separated when she was young. She did not have a relationship with her father. When she was 3 years old, Madison and her infant-sized sister were apprehended and placed in a foster home because her mother and stepfather were using substances, been housed in instability, and there was family violence. Madison and her sister were adopted by foster parents when she was 7 years old. Before she was 3, child intervention was involved with her family 5 times because of the concerns related to parental substance abuse and family violence. During that time, the parents separated. She entered into a relationship with others, and while caseworkers reviewed and cautioned about the reported concerns, it does not appear that the father was contacted before involvements ended. When Madison was just 3 years old, Child Intervention received a report that she and her newborn sister were left with inappropriate caregivers, were exposed to the substance abuse and the family violence and criminal activity. Caseworkers obtained a supervision order that addressed housing, relationship, and addiction issues. Efforts to locate the father were not successful. The parents didn't access services, and over the following 6 months, caseworkers received ongoing reports. Days before her 4th birthday, Madison and her sister were apprehended and placed in foster care, where she started preschool and enhanced her socialization and early learning skills. Caseworkers obtained a temporary guardianship order, and over the following year, case planning focused on addressing the substance abuse in the family, the violence, the instability. They had inconsistent visits with their children. A parent was incarcerated. Madison began seeing a therapist after her foster parents noted she struggled with impulsivity and healthy boundaries. Caseworkers located the father, were explored whether or not he or an extended family could care for Madison, and they could not, and they were unable to have contact with her. Shortly after her 5th birthday, she became the subject of a permanent guardianship order. She acknowledged that the mother acknowledged using substances while pregnant with Madison. Caseworkers developed a permanency plan for Madison and her sister that included them being adopted together. Therapeutic services, including parenting strategies that focus on behavioral and attachment issues, were provided to the foster parents. And over the following year and a half, Madison had sporadic contact with her parents. Mother moved out of province, stepfather incarcerated, and over time visits and telephone contact were stopped because of the impact on Madison's behaviors. She started school, loved to socialize, and by grade 2, she had challenges with math and received extra support in class. When she was 6, she was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity, was prescribed medication. In the following year, neuropsychological assessment found that she had mid-average intellectual functioning, despite caseworkers saying that substances were likely used during the pregnancy. This information was not reflected in that assessment. Recommendations included continuing to provide extra help in math, counseling, monitoring her behavior and medications. Days before her 8th birthday, she and her sister were adopted. Intervention involvement ended after adoptive parents were connected to the Supports for Permanency program. I think we can see this report about Madison goes on for another 9 pages. There's considerable information and data here already about just the first 6 years of her life. It's important that we take the time to review this information. I think we've already heard about, just in this one person's life, what they were going through, what we learned from that process. We saw already that in one evaluation, a pretty important period of her life in pregnancy, when there was substance abuse, was not included in an evaluation. I think we can learn from these things, Madam Speaker. I think it's important that we continue to learn from these cases, that it is our responsibility in this House that we care for all Albertans. These particular Albertans are directly in our care, and we should be considering what we have learned from their lives, respect and value their lives, and say that we're going to continue to do this investigative work, that we're going to continue to support the OCYA in their work. We should be sending a signal to all of the children in care in Alberta today that we care about them.